So let's start. At its Milwaukee convention, the Republican Party adopted an extraordinary platform. It's actually largely written by Donald Trump and edited by him. It reflects Trump's view. And it's a total change in the Republican Party from the party of Wall Street and war to return to its roots as the party of Lincoln, which, as the platform says, is the party of workers, industrialists, inventors, engineers, and farmers. In a mere 16 pages, the platform lays out what this means for the country. It says, common sense tells us clearly that if we don't have domestic manufacturing with low inflation, not only will our economy be at the mercy of foreign nations, but our towns, communities, and people cannot thrive. The Republican Party must return to its roots as the party of industry, manufacturing, infrastructure, and workers. President Trump's economic policy to end inflation and return manufacturing jobs is not only what the American economy and American workers need right now, it is also what they want right now. Common sense tells us clearly we must unleash American energy if we want to destroy inflation and rapidly bring down prices, build the greatest economy in history, revive our defense industrial base, fuel emerging industries, and establish the United States as the manufacturing superpower of the world. So this is only some of what the platform says, but as you can get the hint there, carrying out this platform means a revolution in American productivity. And that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. So let's begin with Brian Lantz, who's a well-known physical economics expert, author of a recent book, What Agenda 47 Can Do, available on Amazon. Go ahead, Brian.
Sure. Good evening. Good to see you, Kevin. Good to see you, Tony. Let's start with energy. Trump's emphasizing that point rightfully. It's been a subject of our discussions on Promethean Action, of course. Go to the first slide, if you will, Tony, just to give so that we know we're all on the same page here in terms of where our energy is coming from, specifically our electricity in this case. And I think it'll, in some ways, it's kind of surprising for all the hype about renewable energy. This is the figures. This came out in 2024. This is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, part of the DOE. Through 2023, renewables was only 9% of our energy, and if you add it up there, biomass is about 60% of that. So this is not only not serious, but it's really creating a crisis. If you could, go back to that one, right? And then you see the other percentages: nuclear, petroleum, still substantial. Primary energy consumption we're talking about here, not just electricity, and natural gas and so forth. So then on to the next slide. I think this is really important to understand. This is primary energy. We're talking about the entire energy consumption of the country, not just for electricity. So if you look here, since the late 1990s, roughly 2000 thereabouts, since then, total energy consumption of the country has flatlined. The population of the United States has grown by another 60 million people. Where did their energy come from? This is just a remarkable, simple statement of the hole we've dug and why the lights are not staying on. And if you replace coal plants, which are being shut down, there's I think it's 188 gigawatts total of coal that's in the process of being shut down. I think that's the figure as I remember it. It's a big figure, and you're replacing it with wind and solar that only operates 30% of the time, roughly, the hole's even bigger. And of course, the cost is much, much more overall for wind and solar. So enough said on that. But we have a tremendous opportunity here with the incoming Trump administration for federal, state, and private sector collaboration. With an energetic president, this is right out of the Federalist Papers. With an energetic president, that's the point of leadership. President Trump and his administration can organize the kind of effort required to build out an additional 1 to 2 terawatts of power, not all within the next 4 years, for this 4 years of his second administration, but in a relatively brief time of, say, a decade. We could build out 1 to 2 terawatts of power production in coal, clean coal, natural gas, nuclear, and then moving on to fusion. Fusion, which is now in development, along with Generation 4 fast nuclear reactors, for example, high temperature gas cooled reactors. Those are Generation 4 reactors. We have, emphasize the state as well as private sector, because you're going to have to be working with existing utilities, including these mega energy outfits that span multiple states. You're going to be working with these interconnections, these regional interconnections of power like MISO and PJM, and then down here in Texas, we have ERCOT and so on and so forth. You have states that are deregulated, which was insane to do, but deregulated, something like 24, a little more than 24, and then the others are still regulated, but affected, of course, by all the green dividends that are offered by the Biden collective and the rest. And so it's all a mess. And in every state, state laws, state public utility commissions or state service commissions, set the rules. So the cooperation of Trump with the governors, which he already has established in many, many cases, beginning with, of course, what we think of politically as the red states, his cooperation with governors, and of course, the governors usually appoint the public utility commissions, and then with the private sector utilities, including these big utilities, energy providers, to basically work out commitments, including funding commitments, to build the additional power plants in respective states, starting with those nuclear power plants that already exist, that have already been cited for additional nuclear reactors, and that are somewhere in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission pipeline. But the other thing I want to emphasize, and then I'll just leave it at this for the moment, with the Vogtle nuclear power plant, which is the next slide I have there, with that, we've opened up a new era with the AP1000 nuclear reactors. These are Generation 3 plus, and we can get the price down to a price less than wind and solar. The AP1000 is being built in China by Westinghouse in conjunction with Chinese plants are already doing that. So we can accomplish that ourselves as we build up our industrial base, as we build that up over time. First, we've got to have energy. But we have 40 US universities with nuclear engineering degree course programs. We have 80 universities with plasma, physics, and fusion programs, which we'll come back to. I'm sure Kevin's going to speak to fusion. We have 35 university nuclear reactors around the country on universities. We have the 17 Department of Energy laboratories, many of them already working on advanced nuclear and fusion. So we have a tremendous capacity, and those universities in particular are training new generations of very skilled people in nuclear medicine, nuclear power, nuclear power plant management, and other areas. And if we bring this forward as a major initiative, not leaving out coal, not leaving out natural gas, because those can be put up quicker at the moment, but we can rapidly make sure that the lights are on, that more power is on the way. We can begin expanding manufacturing and so forth, commitments to locate plants and so on, knowing that the energy is going to be there. We can get that all into the pipeline and moving. But it's going to take an energetic president to work this through with these private sector companies, with all the different regulations, state level regulations, public utility commissions, and all the rest. But it can be done. And the Department of Energy and other financing mechanisms, federal credit mechanisms, can ensure we have the resources. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess I'll take over. We should step back a minute and talk about productivity per se. So economists define productivity as basically output over input. Or if we're talking about labor productivity, which is actually the key, it's how much output can a single worker generate? Some economists prefer to use output over labor hour, but they're proportional, output per worker or output per labor. Another thing to look at, a very key metric people look at for economies around the world, is GDP per capita. If you recognize that the number of workers in a labor force is proportional to the number of people, usually about 60% is the labor force, then GDP per capita is also proportional to productivity. So it's for this reason that if you want economic growth, there's not an economist in the world that wouldn't tell you that the engine of that is increasing productivity. So how do we do that? If it's output per worker, we need to make each worker more powerful. So historically, how did we do that? Well, we invented engines powered by fossil fuels. So if you take a typical person, we each burn about 2,000 calories a day. And I think that's about 1/10 of a horsepower. You can check me on that. But if that same person is given an internal combustion engine with some gasoline, you're up to 10 horsepower. And then if you do bigger, so that's then an increase in productivity by the supplementing of labor with technology, an engine. You've increased productivity by at least a factor of 10, if not 100. So that's historically why we all say that scientific and technological progress is the basic cause of increasing productivity, because it brings into an economy greater power of labor. So let's take this to an extreme. So as I think most of you know who are listening tonight, that there's a big push in the country and basically around the world, China, Europe, United States, India, for artificial intelligence. Also for robotics and humanoid robots. In fact, there's a factory right now, a BMW car factory in South Carolina, that has humanoid robots walking around the plant doing work. The other thing I hope we're all aware of is computers. There's a total transformation, a new type of computer being produced called the quantum computer. Traditional computers, they work by looking at the state of a bit. It's either a 0 or a 1. It's a simple switch, and transistors could do that. With the quantum computer, you go to a totally different way to encode a state. You basically are looking at electron states, and you can get an increase in computing power of 10,000 to 1 over today's computers. So that's on the horizon. And then, of course, the other thing Brian mentioned is fusion energy. So we've got 4 basic technologies that are emerging throughout the world. Let me just say them again: artificial intelligence, robotics and humanoid robots, fusion energy, and quantum computers. And it's going to be the case that the nation that leads in those 4 areas will become the world's superpower. There's no doubt about it. And that nation will have a tremendous increase in productivity. So let me just show, but these four technologies have to be developed synergistically or together. So I don't know, Tony, if you could bring up a chart, I've got to kind of walk us through that. Yeah. So as I say in the title, the Trump administration must fund 4 emerging synergistic technologies to become a manufacturing superpower. And those, you'll see the 4 technologies I mentioned in the little circles. Artificial intelligence in blue, the robots, and especially humanoid robots in green, fission and fusion energy in the pink, and then the quantum computers I've got in a circle representing the entire manufacturing sector of an economy. Because as we all know, computation is endemic to both goods and services. So it is the key enabler for almost everything these days. Let me talk a little bit about this artificial intelligence. So one of the key things that makes artificial intelligence possible is what they call a neural network. And it's basically a way to mimic just the mechanical part of making decisions in the human brain. That's why they called it a neural network. And it's basically, well, I won't go into the details, but these neural networks need to be what they call trained. You need to give them a lot of input data so that the output for a given input is what you want it to be. And so it kind of mimics the raising of a child, right? I mean, you train a child how to do certain tasks, and the neural network is trained in the same way. But it takes huge amounts of input data. In fact, the input data has to basically encompass all the tasks that you expect the artificial intelligence system or neural network system to perform. So artificial intelligence requires data centers full of computer processors. And I'll just give you one example. So Tesla, the company founded by Elon Musk, as you know, has they're working on self-driving cars. That requires artificial intelligence. They're building a data center in Memphis. And that data center will have the first version will have 100,000 general processing units, GPUs, 100,000 computers. Okay. To power those and to cool them, computers generate heat. You need 150 megawatts to power that data center. A single nuclear reactor puts out about 1 gigawatt. So it's about 1/7 of the power output of a nuclear reactor for a single data center for one of these artificial intelligence systems. Just to let you know, to cool them, they have to run through that building 1 million gallons of water per day just to cool them. So that just gives you a sense that if we're going to do artificial intelligence and be the world leader, we're going to need to upshift our production of energy by a factor of 10 in the next few years. All right, so let's follow my diagram here. Artificial intelligence enables better robots. Well, it certainly does, because the brain of the robots is provided by artificial intelligence. It's in the self-driving cars of Tesla. It's also in the Optimus robot that Tesla is putting out. And there's other companies building humanoid robots. And if you just think about what it takes to make a machine, maybe lift up a glass and a pitcher of water and pour water into that glass, takes a tremendous amount of brain power for that little robot. But they're working on that. And as I said, some robots are already working in a car factory in South Carolina at BMW. But artificial intelligence is required to make the robot work. All right, what's the robot do as far as productivity goes? Well, it can do all the drudgery work that humans don't want to do. And not only that, if humans want to do their work, If you want to double production, just for each human, add a robot, and you've doubled production without losing any jobs, human jobs. You've just added another source of work. So, what does that do when you increase productivity in that way? Well, if you're producing many more goods in a given hour of labor, the cost has to be coming down. Because when you make things, the basic cost is the cost of labor. You all know that when you bid for a project or you get work done, you always want to make sure it's done for the least amount of work or labor, right? So the way to bring down cost is to bring down labor. So that's what robots enable. So if you put robots throughout an economy, aiding and helping human labor, it's going to bring the cost of all goods and services down. And that will include energy. So fusion energy, fission energy, and actually petroleum energy will all get less expensive through the production of robots throughout the economy, or automation. You can think of it as automation. We should also point out the difference in cost. If everything else is equal, why is fusion perhaps less costly than fission? Well, a fission power plant, Brian showed you the picture. They have big cooling towers, and also they produce steam, which runs a turbine generator. Turbine generators are about 40% efficient. And so that you're wasting about half the energy from the nuclear fuel when you're producing electricity with fission. And also, it's not quite as energy dense as fusion. It's about a factor of 4 or 5. That in 1 kilogram of fusion fuel, you'll get about 1/5 of the energy out as you would with fusion fuel. Hopefully I said that right. Fusion is about 4 times more energy dense than fission. And so if you take the efficiency and the energy density together, and everything else is equal, the cost of capital and equipment and labor, fusion just out of the gate is going to be 10 times cheaper than fission. And as Brian said to you, fission already today is one of the lowest costs of energy out there, competitive with solar and wind and petroleum. So going to fusion in the future is going to be, again, a factor of 10 improvement in the cost of energy. All right, so then low cost energy, what does that do? Well, that enables the artificial intelligence, because as I told you, each data center requires 150 megawatts. So if you take all of these, and then of course the quantum computers enables the calculations that enables all of these other components and technologies. So taken together, synergistically, if you do all 4 of these things, your economy will take off and enable high productivity manufacturing. Now I want to give you a really concrete example of a benefit of this. So if we go to the next chart. Here we go. So it's been said that steel, of all, or let's say of all the commodities in the world, steel is probably the second most useful to mankind, with energy sources being number 1. We just could not have a high standard of living and live in the world we do today without steel. So iron is just a prerequisite for everything we do. So today, I want to show you how you could actually produce iron in a totally different way than we do today if you have very low cost energy and some additional automation. So today, we produce iron by mining iron ore. And there's 2 basic minerals. There's magnetite and I think hematite. Magnetite is the one most common in the United States. It's in Minnesota and Michigan and other places. And the actual dirt that has this magnetite mineral in it is about 25% iron. And the actual magnetite molecule itself is got 3 atoms of iron and 4 atoms of oxygen. I've got it right there, Fe3O4. So, but it's very interesting. If you look at average dirt, the average dirt in the Earth's crust, that's about 5% iron. And down below the little 5 piles of dirt there, you see everything else that's in a pile of, or just in the Earth's crust. It's actually about half oxygen. And you can see that with the magnetite ore. Notice that's an oxide, that's iron oxide. So lots of oxides in the Earth's crust. It's got silicon, aluminum, there's the 5% iron and so forth. All right. So today, when we produce iron, we just take magnetite ore and we usually grind it up and try to concentrate it, get it, the minerals we're not interested in out of it. And we put it in a blast furnace and we produce iron. There's a brand new technology just emerging that instead of using blast furnaces, which are fueled by coal or basically coke, that instead of that, we can use electrolysis. Electrolysis is the method currently used to make aluminum. But now they found a way to do it for making iron. And it's a really elegant process. Some of you might be familiar with the electrolysis of water. But you basically just put 2 electrodes in an electrolytic bath, put some current in, and it'll separate the iron oxide molecule into oxygen and iron, and you can draw off the actual atoms and get almost pure iron out of these things. And they're also very efficient. You have to heat the electrolytic bath to about 1600 centigrade, and you can do that electrically as well. And there's very little waste. It's just a very efficient process. So we could do that with magnetite ore. But now let's look ahead. So suppose we get fusion, suppose we get humanoid robots, and suppose we have all these technologies ready to go in 10, 20, 30 years. Well, suppose we wanted to get the iron out of average dirt. Well, since it's got 5 times less iron per unit weight than in the ores we're using, look on the left, 25% iron in our ores today, only 5% iron in average dirt. That means, very roughly speaking, we're going to need 5 times more energy and 5 more times material throughput in our smelting process to get the same amount of iron. So really, all we have to do to start mining average dirt, which of course is everywhere, is increase or decrease the cost of energy by a factor of 5 and increase the level of automation by a factor of 5, and you'd be comparable to the cost of iron that is produced today. So that is very much in reach in the next 20, 30 years. Besides that, if you're going to be smelting this average dirt, look at all the other minerals you could get out if you were smart about processing it. You can get out the silicon, the aluminum, the calcium, the sodium, the potassium, the magnesium, and so on and so forth. So it's just going to be a transformation in the production of basic metals to whichever nation masters this, and then in the production of goods in the days to come. So this is why we're making the point that if we increase productivity by developing these 4 basic technologies, the United States certainly can become a manufacturing superpower in the next 30 to 40 years and have a tremendous increase in abundance and wealth for the average people. So I think that's about what I wanted to say so far, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. Brian, you're muted.
Thank you. Turn to the question of our labor force, of skilled operators, and the development of the labor force. First, I just mentioned that robotic equipment in the United States is about 1.1% of total capital expenditures in manufacturing. It's a very small number.
Very small number.
12 billion in 2023.
Right.
And that's 80% of all robotic uses in manufacturing. You can think of the auto sector, of course, that's the largest single sector. So the question of building up the economy I mean, first of all, there's the question of federal credits, financing, capital, as we both know, the capital investment to make this bridge, as we're talking about, or as Kevin is talking about, 20, 30 years out, the bridge to that. In addition, there's the question of the labor force. And I just think that's really important to bring in. First of all, I mean, just in terms of AI or really production in general, I mean, you can go back to the Leontief model of input outputs, in the World War II period. But the commodities do not produce commodities. Human beings produce in the fundamental sense of profound changes made on nature for man, which is always a process of the very revolutions in technology and knowledge, more fundamentally, that Kevin was developing in terms of what has transpired over centuries, and certainly over the last century. A feature of the build out of energy, which Trump is emphasizing, is so critical, and that we're emphasizing in terms of fission and fusion, is the build out of the supply chains, the productive small and medium-sized manufacturers that will then go on, they and the next generation go on and multiply in terms of being able to carry that same those new skill levels, including in nuclear science and technology, nuclear engineering and all the rest, into other areas of production. And I want to just make a point about scaling up. Elon Musk made a statement some time ago that, developing a prototype, okay, that's one thing, but scaling up to manufacturing is 1,000 to 100,000 times more difficult. And others like Andy Grove, formerly of Intel, warned that if we outsource manufacturing, we were going to miss out in not taking on that huge task of scaling up to full manufacturing. We were going to lose the knowledge that would come with that process, the discoveries that would come with that process. And so just to emphasize, you've got a prototype, you want to bring it into manufacturing. Well, there's the supply chains, there's the production line, there's getting the materials there on time. It's making them actually work in the real world on a manufacturing scale, not a one-off. And all of this involves innovation, and those innovations are made by the workforce, the workforce, increasingly skilled workforce that is working through those problems, working through that process. Just to make another comparison, a child doesn't need to look at 5 billion pictures of cats to know what a cat is, to learn what a cat is.
Right.
With AI, you may have to go through 5 billion pictures to get
5 billion pictures of cats. Yes.
To get the curve fitting to the circle, right. To get the and therefore all this energy, it takes a lot of energy to even approximate, to mimic. Right. It's not human knowledge; it's mimicking human intelligence. It's not intelligence. AI is not intelligence. I just would make that polemical point, but its usefulness is already here, as Kevin said, and we can multiply the productivity of our workforce. So I think it's really important to just bring forward this element of a bridge between now into these future concepts, future technologies that will sort themselves out, over the coming years as they're applied in the very process that Elon was talking about. Not to make him a god, but just as a reference point, he knows nuts and bolts. And steel, of course, along with that. steel. A mile of steel is more than 100 tons of steel.
Right.
We import
Mile of rail.
25% of our steel today. If we're going to expand the economy, including producing all these robots, which robots are an important feature for productivity, and they're developing new iterations of robots. They can do multiple tasks as opposed to singular tasks. And of course, there's the humanoid robots in process of being developed. If we're going to do that, we're going to have a lot more steel, like a double and tripling of total steel production, which again requires skills, requires the new technologies, but it requires a workforce that can work with those new technologies as well. So that I'm just bringing in a few other elements. I think maybe for the sake of time, I should stop there. And if you have comment, Kevin, or further.
Maybe, Brian, we should just talk a little bit about the funding required to bring
yes.
Yeah. So the other day I was reading an article on, I think it was the robots. So China, Xi Jinping, he actually personally visits the companies in China developing humanoid robots about once a month. And China as a nation is putting $1.5 billion per year into the development of humanoid robots. They're putting about the same into fusion energy, about the same into artificial intelligence, and the same into quantum computers. So that's about $6 billion per year to develop these technologies. That's our dear competitor across the Pacific in China. So if we're going to compete, if we're going to become a manufacturing superpower, we've got to match that investment, if not exceed it. So the problem facing the Trump administration is, where are you going to get I would double it, $12 billion a year to make sure these things are developed at a rapid pace.
And those steel mills built and those power
and everything else that goes with it.
Yeah.
The infrastructure required and so forth. So given that our national debt is up to about 35 trillion, and the interest on that debt alone is comparable to our defense budget, we cannot use traditional federal spending to fund these projects. What we've got to do is do what President Roosevelt did in the Depression era and come up with some form of a national bank.
Yeah.
And his national bank in Roosevelt's was the RFC, Reconstruction Finance Corporation, but we could have something similar. And the whole purpose of these banks is to make low interest loans, credit down to 2% interest. And that's exactly what these entrepreneurs and business leaders need, is low interest credit.
Yeah.
So that is what's missing from the discussion in today's political campaign, and something that the Trump administration, we definitely encourage them to look at this option for funding these technologies.
Yeah, I would add, the talk of a across the board 10% tariff, I think I've mentioned it before, but just a percentage of that, a third of what you might get off of we have a $1 trillion trade deficit now. We're importing $3 trillion worth of goods a year. Just a 10% tariff would easily generate, a revenue stream, just a portion of which could fund 100 billion into a national infrastructure bank, Reconstruction Finance Corporation vehicle. And as we've talked about before, Kevin, you and I have talked about.
So that would get it kicked off, right, Brian?
Yeah.
The initial capital outlay.
And that would keep coming year after year. Right. And you multiply in terms of standard bank lending, that 100 billion a year multiplied by 10, you're generating $1 trillion a year potentially in terms of credit, right? So, I'm not trying to get fixated on a specific mechanism, but that clearly would operate. And just to fill that out, at the start of World War II, before Pearl Harbor, you know, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was the basis for $3 billion, which was an enormous sum in that day. I mean, a multiple, 20 times at least what it is today, 20, 25 times. Just went to financing the machine tool sector, which we haven't had a chance to talk about directly here, but it's related to robotics,
Right.
machines and machines that produce machines.
Right.
You know, that's critical to do
Right.
any and all of what we're talking about here in the short and long term, is to build that up. That was just one example of what the Reconstruction Finance Corporation did at the orders of the War Production Board under our friend from Michigan.
Newton.
But I think that emphasis, well, just one additional point, I was almost forgot it. This is off budget. It was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was off budget. It wasn't subject to annual budgeting by the Congress and the political fights and so forth. It was a separate flow of funds, really a capital budget, separate flow of funds from the Treasury to specifically to the RFC, and from there out to the whole U.S. economy, the whole 9 yards.
So we fund all of this,
all
of these activities off budget. It not only makes us more productive,
Yeah.
increases our GDP and GDP per capita, but it also gives us the means to pay down our deficit.
Yes.
Our debt. Right.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, Brian, I'm about ready to take some Q&A if you
Yeah,
want.
yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, terrific.